Welcome to Create More Intimacy, a podcast for men. I'm Elisa Stoddard, and I help successful men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. You're doing everything that you believe that you're supposed to. You're working, you're providing, you're showing up for your family, and yet it still feels like something is missing. Welcome to episode 49, Why You Still Feel Unappreciated No Matter How Much You Do. In your mind, this should count. The effort you are putting in, it should count. The responsibility you carry, the way you keep things moving, even when it's heavy, that should matter. And not just in a quiet behind the scenes way. It should be seen and recognized, appreciated in a way that actually feels like something. Because if you're honest, a quick thank you doesn't touch it. It feels polite. It feels surface level. It doesn't match what it takes for you to keep doing what you're doing. What you really want is for it to land, for her to look at you and get it, see how much you're doing, to feel impressed, to feel grateful, to respond in a way that makes you feel like what you're doing actually means something to her. And when that doesn't happen, or it just feels half there, you don't just brush it off, you notice. You feel the gap between what you're giving and what's coming back. And over time, that gap starts to feel personal. Like maybe you're not being seen in the way you should be, or worse, that what you're doing isn't enough in the one place it matters most. What starts to happen, often without you even knowing it, is that you begin to look to her to close that gap for you. Not just to notice what you're doing, but to respond to it in a way that settles something in you. You want her reaction to match your effort. Because if it does, it feels like confirmation. Like what you're carrying is worth it. Like you're doing it right. And when you get even a glimpse of that, when she says something that feels more genuine or shows appreciation in a way that lands a little bit deeper, it gives you this brief sense of relief. You feel more grounded, more steady, and a little bit more like yourself again. But it doesn't last. So you find yourself circling back, looking for it again, paying closer attention to what she says, what she doesn't, how she responds, how she doesn't. You start measuring moments, even without knowing you do it, trying to make sense of why it doesn't feel consistent. And the more you do that, the more it starts to feel like the answer is somehow just out of reach. Like if she could just see it a little more clearly, or say it a little differently, or respond a little more fully, then maybe this would settle. But it never quite does. Not because she's failing you in the way it feels like she is, but because you're asking for her response to do something much bigger than respond to what you're doing. You're asking it to change how you feel about yourself. And that's why it keeps turning into something you chase instead of something that actually satisfies you. Where this really starts to show up is in the moments where you're not at your best. Not maybe the big moments, but the everyday ones where you're tired, where work has been heavy, where something just didn't go the way you expected, or you just feel off and can't quite explain it. And when I talk about a client, he works long, long hours and he carries a lot of responsibility. And most days he handles it quite well. But there are stretches where it builds. He's not sleeping as well, and things at work feel a little bit uncertain. And underneath it, there's this quiet pressure he doesn't really talk about. But then he comes home and he's still doing what he always does. He takes care of things around the house. He's trying to stay engaged and trying to be responsive and responsible at home. But internally, he's not as steady as he looks. In those moments, he's more aware of her, more aware of how she greets him, more aware of what she says, more aware of whether she notices anything at all. He doesn't think of it as needing something from her. To him, it feels more like if she would just see me right now, that would help. So he leans in a little, maybe tells her something about his day, or makes a comment about everything he handled, or does something thoughtful and then waits. Just slightly, but he's waiting to see how she responds. And when she doesn't respond in the way that he was hoping, because maybe she's distracted or she just says something quick and moves on, it just lands harder than it normally would. Because it wasn't just about that moment. He was already a little depleted, already a little bit unsure, and already carrying more than usual. So now, instead of it rolling off, it sticks. And he feels it as disappointment, but underneath it is something quieter, something closer to, I don't think she really sees me. And without realizing it, his energy shifts. He pulls back a little bit. He gets shorter in his responses and maybe a little bit quicker to clap back. He's less open, more irritable. And from his side, it makes complete sense. It feels like he needed something small and she didn't get it. She didn't give it to him. But from her side, what she experiences isn't the internal buildup that led up to that moment. She experiences the shift, and that's the change of tone, the distance, the tension that wasn't there maybe even a few minutes ago. And she's left trying to make sense of it without having the full picture. So now both of them are reacting to that vibe. He's reacting to not feeling seen. She's reacting to a change that she doesn't understand. And this is where the pattern starts to repeat. Because the next time he feels off, he looks to her again in a way that maybe he doesn't even recognize he's doing. And the next time she feels that shift, she becomes a little bit more guarded, a little less natural in how she responds. This isn't because she doesn't care, but it no longer feels like some simple moment between them. It feels like something heavier and like something is a loaded conversation, and she doesn't know how to handle that. If you really slow this down, what you're wanting in those moments isn't complicated. You want to feel like you matter. You want to feel like what you're doing counts, like it's being seen by those you love the most, like it's making an impact. And if you're honest, there's a part of you that wants more than a simple acknowledgement. You want her to light up a little when she looks at you, to respond to you in a way that feels genuine, not just automatic and what happens on a regular Tuesday. To make you feel like a guy who's doing well and who's showing up and who's worth being proud of. You want to feel like $1,000,000 for a minute. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I get it. That desire makes sense, especially if most of your life you've spent it carrying tons of responsibility and solving problems and pushing through without much recognition. Of course, you'd want a place where it lands differently. But this is the part that matters so much. When that feeling depends on her response, it puts you in a position where you're always waiting for something outside of you to settle, something inside of you. And even when she does respond well and says something that feels sincere, it doesn't quite fill the hole. It doesn't hold. Because the question underneath it isn't actually being answered. The question isn't, did she notice? The question is, am I enough? And that's not something she can give you in a lasting way, no matter how well she responds. Which means, without realizing it, you keep going back to her for something she can only, perhaps, provide temporarily. And the more you do that, the more it feels like you need it. I want you to know it's not because you're weak, but it's because you haven't ever been taught how to generate that steadiness on your own. So the shift here isn't to stop wanting the appreciation. It's to stop asking her to be the source of how you feel about yourself. Because when you feel solid in what you are doing, when you know it matters without needing it to be reflected back to you, her appreciation starts to feel like the cherry on top, something extra, something you enjoy, not something that you rely on. And that changes how you show up with her. It takes the pressure out of your interactions. It makes your responses steadier. It gives her space to respond naturally instead of feeling that weight and like she has to say it and get it right. And ironically, that's when appreciation tends to show up more. Not because you needed it less, but because you're no longer depending on it to feel okay. This doesn't change because you decide once that you shouldn't need validation. It changes in the exact moments where you normally would need it. When you walk in the front door after a long day and you can feel that part of you paying attention to her reaction. When you finish something that mattered and notice yourself wanting her to acknowledge it in a certain way. When you're already a little tired and off, and you can feel yourself leaning towards her as a way to feel better, those are the moments where this work actually happens. And it starts with noticing it without immediately acting on it. Not necessarily pushing it away, for sure not judging it, but just recognizing, hey, I am looking to her to settle something in me right now. That alone will slow things down more than you expect. Because once you see it clearly, you have a choice. Instead of waiting around for her response or adjusting your mood based on what she says, you can bring your attention back to what you already know is true. And that is that you did show up, that you handled what needed to be handled, that you are doing what matters, even if it isn't being reflected back to you by those around you in that moment. And that doesn't mean you never want appreciation from her. What it does mean is that you're not dependent on it to feel steady. So when she does say something, it feels like a true compliment and it lands differently. You're not over there evaluating it and you're not measuring it, and you're able to take it in without needing it to do a much heavier lift than it was ever meant to do. And when she doesn't say anything, it doesn't create the same shift in you and the stories that you tell and the ways in which you withdraw. You don't carry it into the next interaction. You stay consistent. And that consistency is what changes the dynamic more than anything else. Because now she's interacting with someone who isn't quietly keeping score, who isn't reacting to what he perceives as missing, who isn't needing her to close the gap for him. And that's what creates the kind of space where real connection can start to build again. When you really start to see this clearly, it shifts something deeper than just how you think about appreciation. It changes how you experience your own effort because you can be proud of you. Right now, a lot of what you do is tied to whether it's going to be seen by someone else, if it's going to be acknowledged by her or responded to in a way that feels good to you. And that connection is what keeps you in that icky loop where your sense of being okay moves depending on what comes back to you. When that begins to loosen, your effort stands on its own in a different way. Sure, you still work hard and absolutely you show up. You absolutely care about your family and what you are building, but it's no longer being measured in real time against her reaction. And there's a steadiness that starts to come in where what you're doing matters because you know it does. Not because it was recognized in a particular moment or reflected back to you in a certain way. And from that place, your interactions with her naturally shift. They don't have to be managed anymore. You're less watchful, less tuned into what you think's missing, less likely to have your mood quietly pulled around by how a moment did or did not go. Which means she's no longer interacting with someone who's looking to her to complete something. She's interacting with someone who's already on solid ground, standing on his very own 2 feet. And that's what changes the feeling of the relationship. Because now appreciation can come from her as something she wants to express, not something she's obligated to give you or responsible for getting right so that you aren't in a bad mood. And now it has the chance to land differently because you're not using it as proof of your worth. It's not a confirmation, but it is something that adds to what's already there. This is also where a lot of men start to notice something they didn't expect. When they stop needing it as much, they actually start to feel it more. Now, something didn't magically necessarily change, but because it's no longer being filtered through that question of whether it's enough. And that distinction matters a lot. The more you rely on her to answer that question for you, the more pressure it puts on every interaction between you two. And the more you can answer it for yourself, the more space there is for something real to grow between you. Which is why this isn't just about words or appreciation or whether she notices what you're doing. It's about where you go, especially on the days when you're tired, when you're just off, and when you're not feeling like yourself, and you feel that pull to look to her to change how you feel. That's the moment where everything we've talked about shows up. And it's also the moment where something different becomes possible. Because this same pattern, this instinct to reach for her to settle something in you, doesn't just show up in what you want her to say. It shows up in how you reach for her in other ways too. We're going to talk about that in a future episode. Talk to you next time. Have a great week. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.